I just want to preface this by saying, and it is important, especially if anybody later watches this because it's recorded and say, who is Boaz to be able to say such a thing? Yeah, who am I to say such a thing? I'm not a doctor, and I'm not an epidemiologist, and I'm not a scientist, and I didn't do any of the research for any of the research for any of the numbers that we have, and so on and so forth. What has helped me tremendously is, as Steve Lopez, when he interviewed me for the LA Times, what he actually said to me was very flattering. Is people think of Steve Lopez as being one of these people in Los Angeles, he's I forget if it's Pulitzer Prize or whatever it is that you win for in journalism. And people say that, he is essentially an expert on infrastructure of the city and so on, and knowing all of the, politics about the city. Well, what makes him an expert is tons and tons and tons and tons of interviews and research as a journalist over the years doing it. And he paid me a very high compliment by saying that he feels like it's a very good comparison to me when it comes to COVID. A lot of armchair experts out there, people who read what they read and get what they get out of it. But, most people, myself included, are certainly not experts. But what's really helped me a lot is talking to these experts and talking to a wide array of them from different political backgrounds. I pride myself personally, if anybody was curious and didn't know me, on being pretty much right in the middle politically. I mean, I try to be apolitical, but I'm somebody who during my life has always sort of jumped around based on who I like, or more likely who I dislike more, and voting against them. That's my politics. So when it came to COVID, I read pretty much everything that the experts were sending me. So what helps is that I work at St. John's, really great hospital. I'm going to ask right now if people can I should have said this already, but please mute if you're not already muted. So what helps me a lot is working at a hospital, Providence St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica, and having worked there since 2013, I've developed very close relationship with many of the doctors, as well as epidemiologists who work over there. And they started to give me a lot of their time when COVID hit, because I was asking them a lot of questions, because I'm very chatty, but also because I wanted to interview them about COVID. So from early on, I was giving interviews to people, trying to understand things more. It was the basics early on with an epidemiologist, and later on it became talking to actual doctors and infectious disease specialists. So it really helped, and it got to a certain point where I didn't have to ask a lot of them questions because I'd already asked them so many times. So I just want to preface it by saying my expertise comes in having spoken to the experts, and a wide array, not just one person, certainly. And it's been very helpful, and I do see disagreement between certain people. So what I try to actually give people when they ask me questions is I try to give them the commonality, what people are basically saying that they agree with, that they come together with. If they're in disagreement, I will tell you that. Now, when it comes to COVID, it's obviously, we're in a different place than we were when I last, did a Zoom talk like this back in December. That was a point in time where we were already losing some of the efficacy. Variants were already happening. Omicron had just started. I think in some of my lectures, I was pronouncing it Omicron, and I didn't even know which way to pronounce it yet. It was, we were figuring it out. Mutations were happening. Mutations will continue to happen. And, as time goes on, we're getting further and further and further from our vaccines, which were based on the Wuhan strain, right? The ancestral strain of the vaccine from Wuhan. And at the end of the day, the more it mutates, the less it's going to be sort of that perfect ideal scenario. We saw in the beginning, nobody was catching it if they were vaccinated. And then Delta came along, and some people were catching it, but most people still weren't, but it was easier to catch. And then Omicron came along, and it became a whole new equation because the spike protein had so many mutations, so many changes. So the bad news is the longer we get away from that original vaccine, and whenever we talk about boosters now, we're still using the original vaccine. So the bad news is the further we get from it, the less ideal that vaccine is, the less well it works, to be honest, right? But the good news is that even now, at the point in time when we really need them to update the vaccine. And spoiler alert, that's going to happen. Literally in a few months, we're going to finally have a long overdue updated vaccine, vaccine booster vaccine, and so on. Is that the beautiful thing is that even if we didn't get to this much needed update, it's still actually working much better to have the vaccine than not. We still want something better. You always want something better. You want something as good as you can get. But make no mistake, to say that this doesn't work anymore is simply not true. It just doesn't work as well as it did. And that makes sense. So,
you know, my doctor told me recently not to get another booster until I get it better. What do you think about that? I mean,
I will definitely answer that. But let's wait in terms of the Q&A. But don't forget that question if I don't get to it independently, okay?
Okay.
And that's a good question. But just a very, very basic type of thing, and I didn't do this with my original talk, but people, you throw around the word vaccine, and they seem to always think that it means, like, can't get it. You are vaccinated, it therefore equates you not being able to get it. All right, I'm gonna do something very, very simple, might even seem condescending. What is the definition of a vaccine? Well, the definition of a vaccine, a substance used to stimulate the production of antibodies. Okay, it still does that here. It stimulates the production of our antibodies and provide immunity against one or several diseases. So you hear that right now, it's like, wait a second, we don't have immunity, because I think of immunity as being the thing that means I'm not gonna catch it. So hold on, pause. To finish that definition, it's treated to act as an antigen without inducing the disease, right? That's like how we tell people we're going to give you a vaccine, we're not going to give you the disease, we're not going to get you sick with it. They're all made in different ways. Sometimes they're made using the parts of the disease, dead disease, whatever, but it's without actually getting you sick with it. Fine, that's the definition of vaccine. The one big red flag there might be that you hear the part where it says provides immunity against one or several diseases. You say, but it's not anymore. Well, let's look up the definition of immunity right now. Merriam-Webster definition over here, a condition of being able to resist a particular disease, especially through preventing development of a pathogenic microorganism. So that would be preventing it in the first place, or by counteracting the effects of its products. That is the other half of what it is that people so often ignore, which is simply when we talk about, oh, it's not preventing it much anymore, but it's helping prevent severity of disease, it's helping prevent hospitalization, it's helping prevent death. That's actually still part of immunity. It's stimulating your immune response. Maybe not that initial one that prevents it, but it as well. But the next part of it, which is just as, if not more important, which is to make sure it's less bad. So I know that might seem a little silly that I just defined those two words, but if you're paying attention to the interwebs, so to speak, you would know that people still continue to not really follow those definitions because they think, hey, I know someone who is vaccinated, I know 1 million people are vaccinated and they've caught it, therefore it didn't work. That's just not true. Now, the latest data that we can have in terms of things, and we're going to get to Q&A. I just want to give some sort of basics first. The latest data in terms of prevention. So back when I was talking about this and Omicron started, I believe, if I remember, it was like 6 times more prevention if you were vaccinated than if you weren't vaccinated. And maybe it was like 12 times if you were boosted, and that was before the second booster. So we've certainly gotten further and further away from it, right? Because time has passed, and now we are at the Omicron, what is it, BA4 and BA5, which are getting further and further away from it. They're more and more contagious and easier and easier to slide past the prevention that the vaccine will give you. But before somebody will tell you there's nothing with prevention anymore, as of May, which is literally just last month, I can tell you that, well, no, as of April, I can tell you that they had that age 12 and up were 1.5 times still more likely to catch it if they were unvaccinated. So that's not nothing. It's not 5 times better. It's not 12 times better, but it's still preventing some more than somebody else who's not vaccinated. And here, let's get into the more important parts of it. And if everybody doesn't mind, I know you're going to be tempting. It is a Q&A. There's not that many people. I mean, genuinely, we're going to be talking with about 15 people. I'm going to be able to get to everyone's questions, no problem. If you don't mind, don't type them in there because...
Well, as I ask people to type them in there.
Okay, it's going to pop up for me every time and distract my train of thought, but I can't blame you for that idea. Anyway, however you need to do it, that's fine. I'm kind of like, you know, the dog who sees the squirrel and turns his head, so it becomes distracting. So April, so as of April, I told you that, but as of April also, if you were unvaccinated, you were 8 times more likely to die at age 12 and up. So that's a pretty big distinction right there. Without vaccine, with vaccine, 8 times more likely to die. That's with all of these variants. That's with the vaccine working less ideally, less well, but certainly still obviously working. And here's a really good one. As of the same month, in terms of the people most at risk, right? And obviously we're going to talk about kids here. I mean, this is initially designed for Natalia's preschool, so we are going to talk about that. But the age 50 and up, the higher age group, how much more likely are they as of April to die if they're unvaccinated and vaccinated with this vaccine that doesn't work as well anymore? 42 times more likely still. So again, it's intellectually dishonest to say that they don't work. They just work less and less well over time, which is why they do need to be updated. 1 booster people versus 2, by the way, it's 4 times more likely to die for the people who are boosted, the 50 and up age group. The 50 and up age group, if they have 1 booster, they're 4 times more likely to die than the ones with 2 boosters. So I am now at Ephraim's question, which he asked me before. Is it worth it if somebody is 50 and up, or if somebody is immunocompromised, and those are the people that are actually eligible for it, is it worth it for them to get it now, even though it works less well if they are eligible? Absolutely. From that statistic alone, I would say it. But I would tell anybody who is going to get their 2nd booster who's eligible now, be ready as soon as the even better, more updated one comes out to also get that. That's what I would say. And I practice what I preach. I was eligible with my immunoglobulin deficiency. Addie is eligible with her ulcerative colitis. Both of us got our 2nd boosters. Both of us will definitely be getting the updated one when it comes out. Okay. And by the way, as of May, hospitalization of unvaccinated people is arranged from every age group, from 5 and up all the way till, you know, whatever age you are, anywhere from 1.4 to 3.8 times higher than vaccinated people for hospitalizations. So there's always these ranges, and their data changes every month, but it's never gotten to the point where the data says unvaccinated and vaccinated, same. Boosted and unboosted, same. We've still never gotten to that point. There's always an exponential improvement by being vaccinated, improvement by being boosted, improvement by being 2nd booster. Now, I do want to say one other very important thing about boosters, and this is going to tie into what we talk about with the 6-month to 4-year-old age group with Pfizer and Moderna that sort of started this whole Q&A, even though the Q&A is about everything now. I hate that they call the 3rd shot a booster. It should not be called a booster. What we learned in the very beginning was that prior to Delta, prior to any mutations, the first 2 shots of Pfizer and Moderna were enough. It was enough. We were fine. We didn't have anything fancy. It was matched up to the Wuhan strain. It blocked it. We blocked transmission. Everything was great. What we learned, though, once Delta was coming, right? Once there were mutations, and especially later with Omicron, is that 3rd shot that they mistakenly called boosters, that they mistakenly still call boosters. It actually, when you get a booster, what does it sound like? It sounds like you're giving a boost to your system. It sounds like, oh, I'm just replenishing my antibodies. They got a little low, they were waning, I'm replenishing it. But that's not really nearly enough of a description of what happens when you get that 3rd shot. Because when you get your 1st shot, do you call the 2nd shot a booster? No, because you know the 2nd shot is improving on the 1st shot, right? It's actually helping to build it better. The 3rd shot does the same thing. The 3rd shot continues that building. Your HPV vaccine, your hepatitis vaccines, those are 3-shot series. We don't call the 3rd shot a booster. We just say it's a 3-shot series. If for one day they say that you should have another one, they'll call that a booster. This simply is a 3-shot series. That's the reality of it. Because what happens with the third shot is called cell attenuation. Your actual improvement happens within you. It becomes more than quantity of antibodies, it's quality of antibodies. They become smarter and more adaptive, which is why people do so much better when they're boosted than when they're not boosted. It's not just their antibodies. So we know that people who have 2 shots don't actually adapt well to Omicron. It slips right by it. But we know with the 3rd shot, they've had a chance to adapt and be mature enough that they're able to do more with the Omicron, even though, yes, it has to be adapted. So let's jump ahead, because we're going to be jumping all over, but let's talk a little bit about, let's at least say what I've already said in Facebook and in an article about the kids' doses. So this newest kid dose, which is Pfizer and Moderna. The Pfizer dose is tiny little thing, 3 micrograms, and they're giving 3 doses of it. And the first dose is given, then 3 weeks later, the second, and then 2 months later, eight weeks after that, the 3rd dose is given. What actually happens with the Pfizer dose, and this is the one my daughter got, who was actually in the Pfizer trials, and we were fortunate enough to find out that she was not given the placebo, so she's already vaccinated. What happens is that the first tiny 3 microgram dose is so small, there's no immune response yet. Okay, so that first dose, and I know this is going to tie in a little bit to Larry, who asked me a question in advance, and I told him to join, so this is going to somewhat touch on that. The first dose that's given gives basically no immune response, but it's obviously setting the table for what you're telling your body to know what to do. The second dose, still so tiny, there's barely any immune response for the kids age 2 to 4. This is where you have to have an okay immune response for kids 6 months to 2, but 2 to 4, no. And some of you read the news at the time, which is why it took a little longer for this to happen, because that's when they said, oh, I think we're going to try a 3rd dose. That 3rd dose became key, because the 3rd dose, just like we saw with adults, even though it was tiny, even though you were getting 3 micrograms, 3 micrograms, and 3 micrograms, it's only 9 micrograms, which is nothing. What are the kids of Pfizer age 5 through 11 getting? They're getting 10 micrograms per dose. What are adults 12 and up getting from Pfizer? 30 micrograms. So these babies now and toddlers are getting a 3 microgram dose. It's nothing. But that 3rd dose suddenly, what did it do? It actually showed a response that showed some prevention even to Omicron. And that's amazing. And it shows that it just was allowed to build up enough in you to, even though it's not adapted, even though it's not the strain we want yet, we know a few months from now they'll finally have the strain we actually want that's for Omicron, it still made it smart enough. So the key here to understand is that when you are fully vaccinated with Pfizer, all right, when you're fully vaccinated with it, with a 3rd dose, 2 weeks after the 3rd dose, it's a 13-week process if you do the math, 3 weeks apart, then 8 weeks later, then 2 more weeks, then you will be fully vaccinated, and that child will actually have some protection with severity and even with preventing transmission. Now, Moderna, here's where I'm going to talk to you very carefully. I have officially, loudly on Facebook and in my article said that I recommend Pfizer more than Moderna. But to you guys, I'm actually in some ways going to recommend Moderna more than Pfizer, depending on what you want and how well you listen to me. Moderna, the problem with Moderna is very specific. It's 2 doses. That's all they'd studied so far. There's no 3rd dose yet. There will be a 3rd dose. We know there will be, but we don't know when. They're still working on it. So the Moderna dose, the problem with it is, I just explained to you, 3 doses are absolutely imperative, and there isn't one yet. My big problem with recommending Moderna, at least unless I talk to people individually, and I'm going to consider this Q&A individually talking to each of you, okay? My big problem with Moderna is that people are going to get their 2 doses and they're going to be told they're fully vaccinated. Your child who is age 6 months, 2, 4, whatever it is, fully vaccinated. And I personally will consider that to be somewhat untrue, because there is no 3rd dose yet. And many of those parents, when the 3rd dose does come along, whenever that may be, I don't know when that is, hopefully sooner rather than later, they're going to be calling that a booster. And all these parents some of them are going to say, oh, let's go get that third dose booster. But a lot of them are going to say, my kid's low risk. They already have 2 doses. They don't need a booster. And I'm going to be sitting here tearing out my head saying, you don't get it. 3 doses are key, because they're stupidly calling third doses boosters all the time. So my issue with Moderna, with recommending the Moderna one, is people not paying enough attention and understanding things. But if somebody understands it enough, I actually in some ways prefer Moderna. Why do I actually prefer Moderna if you're paying attention? Even though that's not the one my daughter got, right? She was in the trials failures, because Moderna gets a much bigger dose. They get 25 micrograms. That one first dose is already 25 micrograms. Remember, I told you that the adult Pfizer is 30, so it's almost as close as that. And we saw just about the same safety from both studies. Both trials showed tons of safety. There were harsher side effects for the Moderna one, but when I say harsher, I'm still talking about mild side effects, the things we're used to getting when we get them. So one of the nice things about Pfizer is your kid will probably have just about 0 reaction to it. It'll be much easier on them. They'll probably have 0 reaction. But Moderna's reaction is not that harsh anyway. And none of the cases in any of the studies had any cases of what people actually are worrying about and thinking about, which is heart inflammation. There was 0 myocarditis and pericarditis in any of those cases. Does that mean there's going to be 0 forever? Absolutely not. It's a limited sample size of thousands. When it gets into the hundreds of thousands or the millions, we'll see cases. But what we do know with myocarditis and pericarditis.
Shirleen commented, Shirleen, if you want to say out loud what you wrote in the chat.
Oh. Shirleen, just so you know, is a pediatrician at Children's Hospital and a dear old friend of mine, and somebody who helped me a lot in the past with gaining insight into what's happening specifically within what she's seeing with pediatric pulmonology. So yeah, so Shirleen can comment on vaccines and MIS-C and long COVID. Yes, I would love Shirleen to, not yet, but yes, I'm begging Shirleen to. I was very excited when she said she was going to come on. But yeah, Shirleen, the answer is yes. I'm going to want you to come into it. But first, let me finish talking about the vaccines themselves. So, Pfizer vaccine, they enrolled 4,500 children in the clinical trials. This is all age 5 and under. 1,678 children received 2 doses 3 weeks apart, and a third dose at least 2 months after the second dose. So out of those 1,678 kids, one of those was our daughter, right? The vaccine was well tolerated. There were no new safety issues signaled. So nothing new that we haven't seen already, that we haven't already expected, and so on. The majority of side effects were mild or moderate. The Moderna vaccine, they did a trial, was even bigger. The company enrolled about 11,700 children. Those were 6 months to 12 years of age. So they had a wider age range of kids. It included 6,700 who were under the age of 6. When I say under 6, the reason for that is because the new Moderna one, it actually, instead of being from 6 months to 4, it's 6 months to 5. So this was their age group. So theirs is a little bit of a different overlap. All children in their study received 2 doses of the vaccine 4 weeks apart, just like we're used to seeing with normal Moderna. According to the data, the majority of side effects for the group under 6 years of age, right, the one we're talking about, the new vaccine, were mild or moderate, mostly reported after the second dose, just like we're used to seeing as adults. No new safety concerns identified. With both vaccine, no cases of myocarditis, no cases of pericarditis, and the conditions. What's important for you to know with myocarditis, pericarditis, and I can get into this more later, but people get very scared off about heart inflammation. That's one of the big ones people hear about. And I talked about it sort of ad nauseum with case studies back in December. It's important for you to know a very simple fact. Myocarditis, pericarditis, along with just about every side effect from the vaccine, is also a side effect of COVID. And with all of these different side effects you bring to me, I mean, I could go back later at the end of this Q&A if you're interested enough, and we can talk about Guillain-Barré syndrome, and we can talk about Bell's palsy, and we can talk about blood clots, and we can talk about myocarditis. And some of these are you're at risk for with these vaccines. Some of them you're at risk for just with Johnson & Johnson. But with all of these, there's one big commonality. Those are actually things you're more at risk for from COVID. So when you are taking that risk by getting the vaccine, you're actually lowering the risk of that same side effect. Ironically enough, you're creating a new risk, but actually lowering the risk because you're lowering your risk of getting it from COVID, which obviously we're all going to get COVID, right? We're already getting COVID. We're going to get it multiple times. We're going to get it throughout our lives. The idea is to lower the risk of what happens to us from COVID. So let's get the myocarditis, pericarditis in younger people out of the way. Myocarditis, pericarditis in 5 to 11. Now, we don't have data on it yet, obviously, for the kids that are just coming out with it, except for the data from the trials, which is 0. It's not going to be 0 forever, but we do see that the real sweet spot of when you're most at risk seems to be age about 16 to 17. We see that people are at risk kind of from age 12 to 24, that's sort of that area. And I'm going to give you the data from them. But we see that when they get under age 12, age 5 to 11, we actually see that it was tiny. Out of 19.3 million doses, 20 verified reports of myocarditis, pericarditis. That's 0.001%. It's very, very tiny. All right. Now, when you go up there, we can see from 12 to 15 years old, that's when they had 338 verified reported cases. 338 might sound like a lot, but it's out of 23.6 million doses. So the range for age 12 to 15 would be anywhere from 0.0014% getting myocarditis from a dose to 0.007%. We're talking about tiny numbers, and these numbers are all bigger from COVID. From age 16 to 17, here's the biggest group for myocarditis or heart inflammation, 16 to 17. So this is going to be your worst group. 105.9 cases per million doses from Pfizer, 292 verified reports out of 12.8 million doses. Let's give you the percentage of what that actually means. What percentage chance do you get if your kid is 16 to 17 and they're getting a dose of Pfizer? 0.0022% to as high as 0.01%. It's very small. And then you get up to age 18 to 24, and I'll just skip ahead and tell you it's 0.0052% if it's Pfizer or 0.0056% if it's Moderna. I think you're getting the idea that we're talking about small numbers. It doesn't mean it doesn't suck if it's your kid or you, but it's still small. The great news about it is even the people that are getting it are almost all surviving it, because it's actually very, very easy to look out for myocarditis and then to treat it with anti-inflammatories. Usually it's treated with something as simple as ibuprofen. So we can talk about these things more later if people have questions, but I'm trying to give you an idea focusing on kids here. So when my overall recommendation as a result is, if you are going to promise yourself that you are going to think of Moderna's 2 doses, which are higher, which are going to give your kid real advantages. Yeah, they're going to have more side effects, just like adults do from Moderna. So they'll have more irritability, more likely a brief low-grade fever, safe type of things, right? But still, more likely things that'll annoy them and maybe keep them out of school for a day. Maybe. The advantage of Moderna, though, is they're getting 25 micrograms. So they're going to have an immune response right away. So they'll already start to get a little bit of protection. After the second dose, which is going to be, just like with adults, a little bit more of a reaction, again, they are going to have some protection. But you have to remember, they didn't get a 3rd dose. So you should honestly, in my opinion, not think of them as fully vaccinated until they come out with and give them that 3rd dose of Moderna. If you're willing to do that, then you have my personal blessing, and I've discussed this with infectious disease specialists, of getting Moderna. If you are, the masses, most people are going to just say, okay, I'm done with the series. And therefore I tell them, well, then get Pfizer, because when you're done with the series, at least I know you've got 3 doses. And you have the advantage, your kid's not going to be irritable. So I hope that sort of gives you a bit of an idea. Now, I'm going to just tell you, before we get to questions, before we get to Shirleen here, who's actually a specialist herself, right? A pulmonologist for pediatrics, for kids. I want to just tell you, I had a chance to speak to a couple of very, very popular Los Angeles-based pediatricians, one of them being my own, and one of them being Dr. Ron Nagel, all right, who's very popular here in the Jewish community. I know a lot of the people go to him. And again, we're talking about people who have different attitudes about masks and mandates, and different attitudes about lots of different things, and probably different politics in them. But both of them, as well as everybody else that I've spoken to from my 12 people that I've talked to, infectious disease and pediatricians, have all recommended it. So here's some things that he told me to repeat. First of all, the virus, obviously, as we said, has evolved since the ancestral strain. We talked about that in the beginning. The bad news is now it's so contagious. But the good news is you have to remember viruses actually generally want to survive, because if they kill the host, sorry to be blunt here, right? But if they kill the host, they don't do a great job at helping spread anywhere else, right? They actually want more hosts. That's the goal of something, right? A parasite wants there to be more things alive to host it. So it's actually helpful to have something that, it's not helpful to have it be more contagious, but it's helpful for it to essentially want to survive more and essentially be more mild, which is why over time, thankfully, it has become more upper respiratory and more mild. Unfortunately, it's still not at the point where it's so mild that we don't fear it, because it still is causing deaths, but it causes less proportional deaths. Less proportional deaths, but more people are catching it, so you still have a lot of deaths. Percentage-wise, you have less people dying, right? What used to be overall as a number about 2% of people dying, now when I look at the numbers and do the math taking into account now, it's about 1.2% of the people dying. Great, that's less of a percentage, but you still have way more people catching it who can die. So he was telling me, he himself, if anybody's curious, all right, he himself has had 3 bad cases from his own patients that are children with just in Omicron alone. He in particular had an 8-year-old with Omicron who now needs a bone marrow transplant because Omicron actually caused something called HLH. I'm sure if anybody on this chain knows what that is, it would be Shirleen. And it basically means the bone marrow shut down. This is a child who had no underlying conditions who got Omicron. I am not trying to scare people. I actually hate scare tactics when they're used. I'm just trying to tell you, though, on the other hand, don't think that nobody gets affected by it. Don't think that it's so rare that it can't happen to anybody else. I'm telling you about one local pediatrician in this community who's had 3 serious cases. And then I can tell you that our own pediatrician I spoke to says that she's already had a child who got COVID. I believe she said a baby, and it actually caused serious seizures. So it definitely happens. It won't happen to most. God forbid it happens to yours or mine, but it certainly can happen, which is why it's just better to not to worry less about it, to lower the percentages of it happening in a serious way. So here's an actual quote that he told me. He said, "I'm worried about a virus that makes people lose a sense of smell and causes long haulers. I'd rather not get it. I'd rather not worry about the unknowns of what this could do to us down the line." He personally is just afraid. There's just too many unknowns. People worry about all these unknowns about the vaccines, but at the end of the day, there's never been a vaccine in the history of vaccines that's been released to the public that's ever had an unknown where we found out years down the line that it was causing cancer or other things. We've always seen the side effects within those first 8 weeks. And what we don't know, what we should worry about, are the unknowns of COVID. Here's a virus that affects our brain chemistry enough that it affects our senses, like smell. So I've talked to him in the past. He's worried about, what happens down the line from COVID. We don't know. What if we start to see more cases of Alzheimer's and dementia or things happening at a younger age? Again, not a scare tactic, just a matter of this is what this pediatrician is himself thinking and worrying about down the line. So he would rather that his kid, the kids in his practice get vaccinated, so it's something that's just less likely to happen. By the way, this is an important factoid. We're used to thinking about the majority of people who are going to have severity being people with underlying conditions, with autoimmune disorders and so on. We don't actually see that with children. With children, we find that of those rare kids that actually get hospitalized, go to the ICU or die, God forbid, we actually find that it's about half of them that have 0 underlying conditions. So, it's a very small number. Chances are, if you are somebody who does not vaccinate your kids will be just fine. So it's just a matter of, let's just lower the idea of that. All right, I'm going to say a couple more things and then get to the long-awaited questions that you guys have. Now we're talking about how low the chances are that your kid would have that something would happen to, and it is a very low chance that something would happen to your kid. And many of us have kids where nothing did happen to them that we know of so far, right? Well, let's think about other diseases that affect children that we can vaccinate for. We vaccinate for rubella, that's the R in the MMR, right? Well, before the vaccine of rubella came out, what was the average number of deaths a year in kids? Or in people? 17, but we started vaccinating for it. People nowadays would look at these numbers using the internet and they would do 17 divided by the population and say, why are we vaccinating for this? The chances of that are infinitesimally small, but we still said, hey, we have a way to prevent 17 deaths, hopefully, let's do that. And most people, right? Most people don't think twice about getting an MMR. Between 1985 and 1991, before rotavirus had a vaccine, an average of 20 deaths per year in the USA for kids under 5, just for kids under 5. This age group that we're now vaccinating this newest one for, 20 a year on average. Again, we still vaccinated for those. Well, what's the average in that same age group, 6 months to 4 years old, right? This very low risk age group. What's the average number of deaths a year from this, including this last year with mostly Omicron and Delta? 86. So we're talking about something that's 4 times more than what we were averaging dying from rotavirus in that same age group. And we of course want to vaccinate our kids for rotavirus. Well, shouldn't we want to vaccinate them for something where there's 4 times as many of them? And again, you can hear this and say, he sounds like a crazy person because 86 is a tiny number. But my point is, if you are pro-vaccine in general, then this should be right in the wheelhouse of something you want to protect your kid for. It doesn't have to be likely that something happens to your kid. It just has to be something you want to lower the risk factors for. If you are somebody that's against vaccines in general, well, I guess I could at least say you're being intellectually honest and consistent by still not wanting to vaccinate for this. And I get that this is newer, but we have so much data at this point on this, and we are seeing consistently in every single type of disease that we are lowering the risks, not raising it. Okay, and here's my last thing, and then we're gonna pause and let Shirleen say the first thing. When COVID started, all right, this is something else that, by the way, the pediatrician told me. When Dr. Nagel told me, when COVID started, they were barely getting COVID, kids, right? They were barely getting COVID. Do you remember that early on? We were like, we're not worried about kids. They're not catching it. And when they catch it, they're not giving it. So they were barely getting COVID. They were almost never transmitting to adults. That's when we were saying, who cares if a kid has it? It doesn't hurt them and it doesn't give it to us. But now it has mutated enough that kids are getting it like crazy and they're easily able to transmit it to adults. So the point is, we can't still have our same mindsets of 2 years ago. It has changed. We have to realize it isn't all the more important to vaccinate them as a result. And some people hate this, but he did mention it's another reason for kids to get vaccinated because it's an extra layer of protection for their grandparents. I know some people say you should never, for the sake of adults, you shouldn't be making them guinea pigs. But, at the end of the day, that is another reason. Take it or leave it. Okay. Plenty of things I could say, but I promised this to be a Q&A more than a lecture. So let's start with Shirleen, Dr. Shirleen, my old friend. She's a pediatric pulmonologist. Do you want to unmute, Shirleen? And hi.
Hi. So I spent a lot of the day with my 3-year-old who was off school. So if I look a little tired, that's why. So I wanted to be sure to address people's questions as well. So I wanted to say there have been 1,500 deaths in children from COVID, and that's a lot of children. I think we've been desensitized to death, unfortunately, in this pandemic. So, when I've heard people say, oh, kids aren't as impacted, that's 1,500 children. Children are not supposed to die. And, I kind of think of the vaccine as buckling our children into their car seats in order to prevent serious injury, because if you get into a car accident, you still can get into a car accident. They still can get minor injury. but the seatbelt provides that additional protection, just as we will not get drunk and get behind the wheel with our kids in the car, even though chances are they may very well be okay. 400 of those kids just about were under 5 years of age. That's a lot of children. And as Boaz pointed out, about half had no underlying conditions that were hospitalized. There have been no cases of MIS-C, which is a multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children with the vaccine. And MIS-C is a scary, scary disease where your child essentially develops signs of septic shock, where their blood pressure falls, their heart fails, the main artery going to their heart becomes so damaged that they're essentially at a much greater risk of a heart attack early on in life. Some have passed away, and these are children that are now following up with the cardiologist lifelong. And for myocarditis in the vaccines, most all cases have resolved on their own and are just fine, and cardiologists have, for the most part, discharged them from clinic. So that's a good point of a comparison. Long COVID in children has been reported in about 30 to 50% of cases. With most cases, usually the symptoms resolve over the course of time, but there have been some severe cases. I am part of the long COVID clinic along with the infectious disease expert at LA Children's, cardiology, neurology, and general pediatrics. We have about 5,000 cases now. Symptoms can include prolonged memory loss, memory fog, children being unable to stand up for periods of, more than 5 minutes at a time. I mean, I'm seeing children in my clinic who can't walk 6 minutes without getting winded. We're still getting to know the disease a little bit better, so it's hard to say what it looks like and whether it compares to the adults who can have massive lung damage. Some kids have heart damage associated with it, some don't. I mean, there have been some children that have lost speech altogether and have required immune therapy just to get better. Children who've forgotten how to eat. Children who were straight A students who now can't think anymore and lost their opportunity to go to college. I mean, these are serious side effects that, although this is rare, it's still common enough where, I worry about it. And, when it came to my own children being vaccinated, there was no question whatsoever, because if I was a gambling person and I had to gamble with the risks of COVID versus the risks of vaccine as a gambling person, I would bet on getting the vaccine over the virus. I just wanted to make sure that, if anyone has questions, I wanted to be sure to answer them. So someone asked about antibodies.
Shirleen, I'll chime in before you get to other ones. I'm sure somebody asked this, I haven't read it, but since you brought up long COVID to stay on track, can you specifically say there's a lot of mixed media about whether or not the vaccines are actually helping to prevent or even potentially sort of help improve long COVID? Do you have any actual insight into that? Because my own answer to people with that has basically been, yes, it definitely seemed to be helping. And now it definitely, as the vaccines have less efficacy, helps less well, but it still helps, and something is better than nothing.
So I think with everyone being overworked in our field, people have not had the chance to publish as much, but I can say anecdotally, it has decreased the risk of long COVID by 50%, but this number has not been published yet. The vaccine definitely helps children who have symptoms of long COVID. Again, this is anecdotal as well, but overall it seems to be helping. It's just, it hasn't quite been published yet.
All right, thank you. I know there's going to be a lot of questions on there that are going to be good for me, like asking, but why don't you go ahead and take a look if you see any questions that are specifically medical, because I would rather you obviously take those since I have you here.
So someone asked about antibody testing. So the immune system is far more complex than antibodies. I mean, antibodies are the easiest to test and it's one of the first lines of defense, but you have to keep in mind that your immune system has many other players. So B cells produce the antibodies, but your T cells are also involved, as well as some other elements of your immune system. So it's far more complicated than just antibodies. So even if your child tests positive for antibodies, they still should get vaccinated.
And let me chime in and remind people that if you are going to go ahead and there's nothing wrong with it, your insurance might cover it, to get antibody tested, you need to remember, because a lot of your doctors won't realize this, that when they're ordering the test, if they simply write COVID antibody test, that will be to check your actual from having gotten COVID in the past, your antibodies. If you're actually going to be seeing your antibodies from the vaccine, they need to be ordering the COVID spike protein antibody test. That's people sometimes freak out and contact me and say, I got the vaccine and I went and got tested and it came back as 0. And I said, did they order spike protein antibody test? The answer is always no. And it's because they never had COVID before, so it shows 0. So keep in mind, those are 2 different tests, please. Go ahead, Shirleen.
And then someone said, can children get their scheduled vaccine? So I've heard a mixture of responses about the MMR, which is the live virus vaccine, but essentially the CDC says you can get them all at once. I mean, I can speak to the experience of my own children. They've licked bird poop off a slide. Their immune systems are exposed to a whole slew of things. So I would say probably it's okay, but I would talk to your own pediatrician and ask their opinion.
And I'll tag team in and say that the AAP, the Academy of American Pediatrics, which is literally like the mommy daddy organization for pediatricians like Shirleen, officially says you can take all of the scheduled vaccines at the same time. You don't have to change any of your timing as a result of this, and you should still get this as soon as it's available, regardless of when your other vaccines are. Yes.
And I don't know how to answer about unmasking children. I mean, it's such a complicated question. It really depends on your child, what their underlying problems are. I mean, immune compromised children, like those who have undergone bone marrow transplantation, chemotherapy, all of that, I would still be very cautious with them. That's a very hard question to answer because we have to keep in mind that, it's far more complex. Some children have gotten anxious, though not children under 5, depressed. I think that if you vaccinate them, you can have the added layer of feeling a little bit more comforted that you've done everything possible to help protect them from the worst effects of this disease. I really haven't been able to answer that question for my patients unless there's a clear reason that they need to continue masking. Keep in mind, I see children with underlying lung disease and immune compromise, and ultimately that becomes a personal discussion with your family and with your own pediatrician.
Yeah, I second that. I haven't been seeing any of the questions yet, but I'm tag teaming off of everything Shirleen is reading. I don't know if that was Larry or somebody else's question, but it really truly has to be personal decision. People have to look at their own risk profiles based on who in their family. It's literally doing a risk profile. Pre-COVID, you would do things like this, like what's my risk profile? What would an actuary say about my life expectancy right now? Am I a smoker? Am I a diabetic? You have to look at your family and the people that you are interacting with. If you live with grandparents and so on, and see, is there a high risk profile? If every member of your family, if you're 2 32-year-old parents with a child and everybody is healthy and everybody is fully vaccinated, I could see it being completely reasonable by saying, you know what will que sera, sera. We've put on our seatbelts, we've put on our airbags, and now we're willing to go out there. And if it comes, we can reasonably assume it's going to be fine. It's probably not going to cause long COVID. Most likely, we're going to get the next booster when it's available. You can reasonably say that. You could also reasonably say to yourselves, you know what? I don't want to take that chance. I'm going to wait until they've updated the strain because I'd feel more comfortable. Until then, I'm only going to unmask with other people that you have to make this as a personal decision. But as Shirleen says, sometimes it becomes more obvious than other times because you have a family member who is severely immunocompromised. You do have to protect them a little bit better. And at least right now, we are not where we were back in May of 2021, when we were basically saying, hey, you're vaccinated, you're not going to get it, you're not going to give it to anyone else. We just can't say that anymore. It would be lovely if we could say that sometime in the next year based on them updating strains. But I don't realistically think we're going to get one so good that it's that. We're going to get a much better one in the fall. It's going to be either monovalent or bivalent. I might be mispronouncing it, bivalent. That's the more likely type of vaccine that we will get. And that's the one where you're basically, if it was the mono version, right, that would be just the Omicron. They'll be updating it and just giving us a new one based on Omicron. But chances are they're going to give us one that's mixed with the original plus the Omicron, because it seems to be giving more coverage and more adaptability. And that's the bivalent one. And that's probably what we're going to be getting this fall. And it looks like Moderna and Pfizer will both offer it. But it probably still will, I can tell you right now, I will be a bit of a prophet right now and say our numbers will get better with prevention, but they still won't be perfect. And they're going to get better with preventing severity, but they still won't be perfect. So it's still going to come back to this same question of you doing your own risk profile of what you want. My own family has to grapple with this. You guys have to grapple with this. I've said to Addie for ages that when Natalia, our daughter, is fully vaccinated, and if we're all up to date with our boosters, that we're going to take it easier with things. And so, for example, this might be like a crazy difference to other people who never have masked their kids outside, but Addie and I have masked Natalia when she plays with other kids outside. She went to a party on Sunday, and for the first time, I was totally comfortable with her, knowing she was vaccinated, playing without a mask with tons of other people outside. It wasn't one kid, lots of other people. But I was like, you know what? Between the outdoors and the vaccine, I'm good with it now. Other people can look at it and make their own decisions and say that they're good with it even indoors. But that's something that only you can make as a decision yourself based on, let's just pretend my kid's gonna catch COVID. Let's pretend I'm gonna get COVID. Am I okay with that right now? If the answer is yes, then that's your answer right there. If the answer is no, then you need the extra layer of protection.
The link of hepatitis to the vaccine was fake news. Anti-vaxxers are quite good at putting false messages out there. And unfortunately, in insulated communities, then that message gets perpetuated. Now, these scary cases of hepatitis that have mysterious hepatitis that children have been getting, where some have needed liver transplantation, a lot of them have had COVID before. There has been no link made to the COVID virus itself. I would not be surprised if there was some link to it, but there has been no link of hepatitis to the vaccine in children. And Hep C, there was in adults who have hepatitis C, the vaccine has been reported to cause reactivation of the hepatitis C virus in adults who have hepatitis C, but you don't get hepatitis from the vaccine. And as far as transmission, if you get the vaccine, I mean, I like to think of, with Omicron, I think you still can very well transmit the disease. And children still can transmit the disease. It just decreases the likelihood. So they're more likely to neutralize the virus, but still, if they have active COVID, I wouldn't go expose them to grandpa or grandma. So I wouldn't, just as if you had measles and you were vaccinated, you still can get measles. You just won't get the awful side effects of it. It still is very contagious and still can spread if you caught measles as a vaccinated individual.
Yeah, for everybody who came on this late, just want to repeat like the most important point that I have to tell everybody, which is vaccines work amazingly when they prevent you from getting it. That's the gold standard, but they still work even when they're not preventing you from getting it, but they're preventing you from getting a worse case of it. It's really important to understand that. Addie just got over COVID today, finally tested negative today. She's somebody who, if she catches a common cold, it hits her like a bad case of influenza. She's never, since 2010 when I met her, she's never caught anything, no matter how minor, without it knocking her on her butt. And really badly. So I always knew that when Addie would catch COVID, she would need all the protection she could get. And sure enough, she had her second booster. Still didn't prevent it, right? She had her second booster, and I got her on the gold standard treatment, which has its flaws, which is Paxlovid. And sure enough, she still had a nasty case of COVID where it still affected her, and she had symptoms for 10 full days, pretty much almost 11 days, but they were never severe. She never had a fever that even reached 101. And that's very common amongst the healthiest of people who catch COVID. So it still works, even in people where you point and say, hey, it didn't work because they got this or it got them like this. No, I know as a fact that Addie's case was less bad than it would have been.
I just wanted to point out that I think it's amazing that everyone here showed up. I don't think anyone who's a true anti-vaxxer would be on this conference. So I think this is amazing to see so many people with such great questions.
I haven't even started to look at them, but if you're winding down on the things that are appropriate to you, I can start reading them and answering them myself.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so looking, well, I should look at the oldest first, right? Somebody needs to, if somebody is here that's about to sign off and needs their question answered, then please interrupt and unmute or type it so at least Addie can flag me, because I'm gonna go to oldest to newest, as I think is fair. So Rachel, you asked, if your understanding is correct, the vaccine loses effectiveness as time goes on since the virus mutates. Yes, also loses effectiveness as it goes on because the antibodies wane. So for both reasons, right? So you're curious about antibody testing, which she got to. And if an epidemiologist having an opinion on it's worth having kids to get an antibody test prior to the vaccine. Okay, was your question okay answered already by Shirleen before this? Okay, great. What about updates? Vaccines for Omicron for kids under 18, will they have to go through long trials again? No, I don't believe so, Erica. I believe what's happening right now is that Moderna is already testing their third dose for this newest one that I told you guys it'll be awesome as long as you get the third dose. They're testing it right now so that it might be that the third dose will be just a third dose, but it might actually be ready with the bivalent one. I might be mispronouncing the word every time. It might be this updated strain with Omicron. It might be ready with that. The fact that they're saying it might be ready with that means it won't, I don't think it'll need entirely separate trials for it. No, I think once those Moderna and Pfizer doses are ready to come to the public, I think they'll be able to take the same dosages of those and make them boosters or whatever it may be for each separate age group. And let me just use this as a quick time to give a quick other refresher. I already told you Pfizer is 30 micrograms for adults, 10 for kids 5 through 11, 3 for the kids in this newest one under 5. Moderna is 100 for their doses, and the third dose, the one they call a booster, the third dose and so on, is 50 micrograms. So Moderna will consistently give you, they're almost the same cocktail. I know that they're technically different vaccines, but it's really, you can just think of them as the same vaccine, with Moderna being extra strength. It's a higher dose of basically Pfizer, which is why you will generally have more protection, higher antibody levels. It'll also wane, but it'll wane from a higher level. But yes, it'll also give you higher side effects because you're getting a stronger dose. So I think that's a good way to think of those. Shirleen, I see your comment. Deborah, who I'm gonna just mention because I know she wouldn't mind. Deborah and her husband, Benny, they actually had their child in the same trial as Natalia and us, and very disappointed to say that their kid ended up getting a placebo. She's talked about this openly. Real bummer, but we should all thank Deborah for literally putting her kid as a placebo in the trials and having to start from scratch now, which could have been any of us. And it was 1/3 of us were placebos and 2/3 were not. So Deborah's
call too that I won't call out because that's their private information and I don't have their permission, but there's more than just.
There's at least there's one other person in this chat who did the same as Deborah and Benny. Okay, I think the question by Deborah was answered. Can children get their scheduled vaccines the day or before? Yes, the answer is yes. And adults, we already know that also as well. I remember I got my COVID. Yes, the answer is yes. Whatever the different shots are, the AAP has made it official. Okay, Yossi, I'm expecting Yossi's question to be a head scratcher because Yossi likes to be challenging. Let's see. Can you address the slide presented at the CDC Advisory Committee? Oh boy, all right, I might have to come back to this, about death comparisons with other illnesses, which subsequently triggered some controversy. I don't know this controversy. I'm gonna have to talk to you about this later and see if I can wrap my head around this, or I'm gonna spend the next 5 minutes hemming and hawing and having to see what you're talking about, okay? I always promise people that I will answer what I am confidently able to answer thanks to my experts. I do not guess at my answers. Number 2, what is it reasonably low risk for under kids 5 kids to undo unmasked after vaccinations. That was not reasonably, okay, so this is where I came up with kind of my answer, where you have to make your own risk profile. First of all, I want you to remember that what they can do after vaccinations definitely means after 2 weeks after the 3rd dose, okay? So let's all establish that. And so that definitely includes the Moderna one, which doesn't exist yet, but by the end of Moderna, you'll have even more protection by the end of the Pfizer one, okay? We talked about that before. So you're gonna have to make your own decisions. My own, okay, I can only speak to myself. Your kid is now going to still, at least prior to the updated strain, you can think of your kid as now having a similar protection to you, except your kid was always less likely to be hospitalized. They were always less likely to die. They were always less likely to have the bad things happen, even if it could happen, right? So the kids were always the safest amongst us, even if we still want to protect them, as Shirleen explained from her own personal experience, right? So you now can think of your kid once they're vaccinated the same way you think of yourself, except even more safe. I mean, they might be more likely to get things because they're licking poles, you know, they're going up to things and just like licking them, right? But at the end of the day, you're gonna catch it, they're gonna catch it. If you feel comfortable with yourself catching it now, I don't see why post-vaccine you can't feel comfortable with your kid catching it. If you don't feel comfortable with you yourself catching it now, you can decide if you feel comfortable about your kid. You kind of have to make that your own decision with that. Our house, as I know your house, Yossi, has a person like Addie where there is immunocompromise there. Like I said, we've made our decisions that we're okay now with her running around and playing unmasked outdoors. We're going to now be okay with her finally playing with other kids who are vaccinated indoors, and she hasn't had that opportunity yet. So your child Bernie is going to be able to play with Natalia without a mask. And you know what? Ask me in a few months and I might be comfortable with her playing with unvaccinated kids without a mask indoors too. I just don't know yet. It's personal choice based on personal risk profiles. Is that an acceptable enough answer for now? Yossi, is that acceptable enough for you for now? No voice, you're silent. You're on one of your modes where there's no actual sound coming out. For now, can you give me a thumbs up? You're probably giving me a snarky answer, right? Yeah, okay. It was probably something half comical. You weren't giving me a snarky answer, okay. Well, you'll talk to me about it afterwards or when you get your microphone back. All right, and number 3 from Yossi is, if a child who is infected with Omicron has been vaccinated, to what extent does the vaccination make it less likely they will transmit Omicron to someone else? I think Shirleen was answering that to you. The answer is that there's no statistical number on how much less likely it is, but it definitely lowers the chances. Remember, I talked about it earlier on that, you know, unvaccinated people are now 1.5 times more likely to catch it. So, you know, maybe it's around that range, 1.5 times, right? And I'm sure that number will be better once we update to the Omicron strain. I'm guessing it'll go from 1.5 to like 9 times, right? So that's my guess. Okay. Can you mix and match vaccines in children like you're able to do with adults? They haven't yet done that okay, so there hasn't been an opportunity to do that yet, Rachel, because so far there hasn't only been Pfizer for kids. There hasn't been any Moderna for kids in this country. Other countries had Moderna. So we haven't had an opportunity for them to make a ruling on that. Moderna is still not even available for kids who are 6 and up, who are 6 to 17, that age group. They're actually applying for that now for the emergency authorization. And I'm sure it'll be accepted and I'm sure it'll be safe and it'll be great and it'll be just like it is for adults, it'll be great. But right, you have to remember that age 6 to 17 has never had it available for us here. So there's been no opportunity for mixing and matching. Once it becomes available, I don't see why they wouldn't say it's okay to mix and match just like for adults. We now have it available for this Moderna and Pfizer for this newest age group, but we don't have time yet to mix and match it because we're not up to boosters yet. It just came out. By the time they're ready to give the boosters, I imagine they'll probably say that's okay too. I'm hoping they'll say it's okay because I would love to give our daughter Natalia when they come out with a bivalent strain in this, hopefully in September, I would love to give her a Moderna one. Especially since, if you think about it, everyone else's kids who are going to get the update, they're going to have just gotten vaccinated. Natalia, for us, she already finished it months ago, right? So she's kind of like, it's already weaning for her. Veronica asked, if a child or anyone has contracted COVID, how long are they still immune for 3 months? That's such a good question. I've had to answer so many people recently. I hope Veronica is still on the chat. Yeah, she is. Okay. The 3-month rule was always sort of a guesstimation based on what they usually see, based on things coming back. But all I can tell you right now is the good news. Okay, I'm going to give you good news and bad news. The good news is I talked to a lot of people, a lot of you on this chat, and I don't know, 200 other people contact me when they have questions when it arises or somebody got COVID. And I have yet to have anybody catch it within a second time within the 3-month window. So that's great, because at least my sample size of a few hundred, it hasn't happened yet. On the other hand, I can tell you, I asked this question straight up to Ellie Goldstein, who is one of my top advisors. He's infectious disease over at St. John's. He's unbelievable, unbelievable guy. I love him. And he takes the time to talk to me. Even today, he talked to me. And I asked him a very, very specific question, and you're not going to like his answer here. My brother had caught COVID. Just a month ago, he got over COVID. And then some members of his family caught it, clearly not from him. The time frame didn't work. So my brother wanted me to ask my experts, which I did, is there any chance I'm going to catch it again this soon? and Ellie Goldstein's answer was, it depends if it's the same strain. And that's not an answer you want to hear, because there's a lot of strains. And the reality of it is that he's not going to be able to give me an actual like statistical possibility number of if it was this, but now it's this, what's the chances? I can refer you back to the fact that I haven't seen it yet, that my brother took the plunge and he's been still with them and he hasn't recaught it yet. But the point is, it could happen, especially these two newest ones, which BA4, BA5, I think they're called. They are so much more different and so much more contagious that, you know, I think if you got any of the other ones like a few months ago, just before this of Omicron, I think you'd be able to catch these other ones too, because they've changed that much. So take that for what it is. You're not going to get a solid answer from that anywhere. You call your doctor, they're going to tell you the 3-month rule, but they're just going to be following what it normally says out there. But if you ask me right now, from what I've found out, it could happen in less than 3 months, but I would still tell people for now, chill. If you don't have somebody who's like horribly immunocompromised at home, just relax for those few months. Patrick, you don't mind me bringing up that you were the first person. Patrick was the first person I ever gave the following advice to. I've never said this out loud till Patrick, but Patrick found out that he got COVID. He actually got such a mild case, he didn't even know he had COVID. He found out because he donates blood. And between the 2 blood donations in a small period of time, he went from having no antibodies to having antibodies. He knows he got COVID in that time, scientifically proven. He was going to Italy. He was the first person who I offered this information, and I called him on the phone and I said, Patrick, go to Italy, eat lots of food indoors without a mask, go to shows, enjoy, kiss people, do whatever you want, just enjoy life. You just got COVID. It didn't even have a mild case. You have no health conditions. You run marathons. There's nobody immunocompromised at your home. I see my risk profile judgment of Patrick was, just live and enjoy your trip and don't worry about it. And he did. And I said, did that change your decision? And Patrick's answer to me was, I was going to do it anyway, but it made me feel better about doing it anyway. So that's sort of my answer. Addie.
I just want to pause and say it's been a lot, this call has been going on for a very long time. I think most of the major points have been covered. If you still have more questions, stay on, Boaz. And
I'm not going anywhere. Yeah, I'm going to go down.
We'll stay on and answer questions, but if you're done, you haven't missed anything. Have a good night.
Yeah, you won't offend me if you're turning off, certainly. Don't worry about it. I know I talk a lot. All right. So in the meantime, somebody interrupts me. Please interrupt me or get a message to Addie if you have to go, but you still have an important question. Otherwise, I'm still going down the list, okay? Veronica, I assume I answered the question and I think she logged off anyway. Okay. Joanne asked a question.
Thank you for your questions and left.
Yes, great. Yeah, she was there for that. Joanne, who's here, who is here longer than she said she was going to be able to be here. When the boosters that are being developed for Omicron become available and they come out, right? Won't the virus have mutated by then? Yes. Okay, so what happens every single year when we get our flu shot is it becomes a predictive model. They're trying to predict as closely as they can to what the flu is going to be that season, and they usually get it wrong. I mean, it's like, I think last year it was like 35% efficacy, not very good numbers. But at the end of the day, even when they get it wrong, we're talking about like, we were hoping to have less transmission, but we still have the other part of the other side of the coin where it still helps prevent you. The year that I caught the flu and I got the flu shot, I believe it was about 45% that year efficacy, which is still pretty low. And I still caught the flu, so I was in that. So I was in that, large percentage that still didn't block transmission, but I still caught a minor case of influenza because I was vaccinated. So when we come out with the Omicron, isn't it going to have mutated? Not only, I don't even have to predict the answer. The answer is yes, it's already mutated since then. The ones they're working on now already don't account for BA4 and BA5. So the answer is 100% yes, it will have mutated, but the goal is to make it at least in the realm of closeness enough to it that it will still do a better job of blocking transmission and a better job of preventing severity. And we can already see from the early data that's coming out that they're already having very, very good numbers from the early Omicron stuff and lesser good ones as it mutates, but still good numbers, way better than what we're working now. So will it be perfect? Absolutely not. Do I hope one day we come out with a new vaccine that's perfect? 100%, and we might. There's companies always working on them, universal vaccines. Will this fall's one be perfect? No, it'll think of it more like a flu shot, which is important to take because it's still going to help a lot more. Your percentages are going to get a lot better once you take it, even though it's going to have mutated by then. The goal after this fall, and the goal that it should have been already, and I'm kind of mad, I'm kind of pissed off that they waited till this fall to do it. The goal, and even the companies say this, the companies say we do not want, even though you'd be like, oh, they make money. The more they do boosters, the more money they make. The companies flat out say, like, our goal is to be an annual shot. Our goal is absolutely not to be every 4 months or 6 months. And that should be what the goal is, right? At worst, it should be a goal of once a year. And with a once a year idea, the idea is that once a year, they're able to update it enough that it's good enough for the next year. And I do believe that we're going to get to that goal, even if we don't get to a universal model. Is that okay, Joanne? Okay, great. Claudia, I don't even think Claudia is still here, but her question was, what's the connection? Oh, that was answered. Never mind. Thank you. That was answered by Shirleen. And had I been answering, my answer would have been, I've never heard of that, so I'm sure there's no connection, but I wouldn't have had the authority of Shirleen to. Oh, Joanne said, when the first round came out, we were told we needed 50 minutes to catch. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Every single variant that's come, when Delta came, it went down. I remember it wasn't really 15 minutes. They said with real exposure, I remember it was like 7.5 minutes originally. With Delta, it became like somewhere like three minutes. It's definitely gone less and less, but I have no numbers for you. I don't think there's numbers anywhere that can identify this, but I would be shocked if you could catch it by walking by somebody. This is not measles, and this is never going to be measles. I truly believe that. Measles is a truly airborne disease. This is truly a droplet disease that can be airborne in the right circumstances. Even in those circumstances, it's not going to ever be as the same way as measles. So no, I don't believe this is ever going to get to the point where walking by somebody without a mask on, with them talking and so on, that you'd catch it. I just don't believe it. I certainly hope that doesn't happen ever.
To respond quickly, would you advise my brother-in-law just caught COVID, and he thinks he got it when he was at Dodger Stadium. He's fully boosted and back, et cetera. But he was outdoors, but it was Dodger Stadium. Right. So it's a mass event.
Right.
It's still outside.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Outside, I feel safe. Outside in a concert, in a stadium, in a place where there are people in every direction of me for an extended period, and they're screaming and yelling, and singing. And those are the types of things that actually can make it go from droplet to airborne. are those types of things to our vocal cords, singing, harmonizing, yelling, screaming. That's why some of the most transmissible places that you could possibly find yourself in are indoor nightclubs and bars. Those are why they're so strict on those in departments of public health, is because it's not just that they're inside and they're drinking. Who cares that they're drinking? It's because they're not only do they have bad ventilation often, it's because people are getting loud as they're drunk. They start to yell, and if there's music, they're singing. Those are the reasons that those become such high risk. So at a stadium situation like that, yeah, you know, when I went to Dodger Stadium,
if you walk into a grocery store nowadays, do you feel everybody should be wearing a mask if you're just walking in a grocery store?
Do I feel it
or
like
going shopping?
You mean like me determining public policy type thing?
I guess I'm not asking.
I hate getting into the
I went
politics.
shopping today. Yeah, no, I went today to the Beverly Connection, and I went inside, you know, the stores like Nordstrom Rack or Chief. I was still the only one wearing a mask, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh.
The way I see it is that people are going to have to make their personal choices. We got to the point where I think it made sense that we had to enforce rules on society when we needed to say, hey, everybody chill, because we need to get these vaccines out and we don't have them yet. And we don't have them for this age group and this age group, and we don't have enough and so on. And we don't have a medicine yet if you do catch it. The beauty of it now is there's now enough vaccine out there for everybody who wants it. And there's enough medicine now for people who want it, thanks to Paxlovid and more. So the fact is, at the end of the day, people should, in my opinion, have a right to make their own risk profiles for themselves. If you don't feel safe in a situation, then you wear a mask in the store, and I'm sure you're going to be fine. And that's what I do too. I also am wearing the mask in the store, but I feel safe wearing the mask in the store. It might feel weird when I'm the only one and I'm like rolling my eyes, but that's my own choice. And I might get to the point in time when I don't feel like I need to wear the mask in the store, and I'm just like, bring it, just bring it. Just give me COVID if you're going to give me COVID. You know, maybe I'll feel that way after the Omicron doses. I don't know, but everybody has to make those personal choices. But I do think that the vital importance of telling everybody what they had to do was vital when we didn't have alternatives for all the people out there who could die. But now that people have those opportunities and have had those opportunities, I think it makes more sense to let people make their own life choices. There's going to be exceptions where you're affecting somebody else, of course. I do think that going into a hospital, you should have to wear a mask, for example, because of all the sick patients, and a nursing facility. I think there's exceptions where those facilities should have those rules for the sake of their patients. Yeah. All right. So moving on for that. Addie is answering a question about Intawasi. Is there a way to find Pfizer or Moderna specific vaccines without having to call pharmacies and doctors? An online database. Addie can handle that one, right? Addie, you've been the one helping people find doses better than anybody. You gonna type that, or you want to chime in?
Well, if you're in California, My Turn is a very easy place to find out which vaccine is available at each site. This first week, they've had some glitches. So it's been better to actually make some phone calls. I know that the best places this first week were Kaiser West LA and Children's Hospital in terms of getting and keeping appointments and not running out. But I would think, well, I guess that was last week at this point. I would think that coming into this week, that a lot of those issues will have been solved. You know, similar to when we were all going out to get our vaccines the first time. It was really hard at first, and then they couldn't give them away. So for better, for worse, it'll be kind of similar. Everyone that wants to get vaccines for their children, it'll be hard because the places just don't have the orders as quickly as we want them. And then later on in the week, next week, it'll be pretty easy. That being said, if anybody wants to ask me questions about individual pharmacies or is like really confused about how to look for those things, message me, email me, text me, whatever, and I can find you 100 different places. I am strangely good at that. So
she was helping people while she had fevers during COVID in isolation. No joke. Okay, Seth, who happens to actually be local, and I haven't seen him yet, he's visiting town. Seth asked, Seth, you still there, I hope? Since this is, there you go. So, hi, Seth. This is the best man at my wedding. He's 4.5-year-old, just had COVID and has some immunity for now. That's true. Would it make more sense to wait till she's 5 to get a bigger dose for vaccine? It's a totally reasonable question. This has been officially answered by not just the CDC, but by the AAP, the Academy of American Pediatrics, which is you don't wait, you don't wait, you don't take these chances. So here's what I've said to people. There's been one circumstance where I've told people, go ahead and wait, and that's people who are vaccinated with a booster, eligible for a second booster, but really have no other, and really have no risk factors other than just being like 51 years old, let's say, and they've had Omicron recently. If all of those things fit that person, I've told some of those people, you can wait a few months to get it, okay? Are you raising your hand or you're saying that applies to you because you're not 51?
Yeah, that's, I mean, not what my question was, but yeah, that's me.
But that's only if somebody is, that's the people that are boosted and had Omicron and they're waiting for it, right? But you, Seth, don't actually even, you actually are not 50 and you don't have immunocompromised that I know of, so you're not even eligible yet. But yeah, if it opens the eligibility, I would say you can wait a couple of months. Now, your children who, well, not your children, your other kids are vaccinated, but specifically your daughter who is not vaccinated yet because she wasn't eligible till now, till it just came out. She's not vaccinated yet. She has some immunity, that's true. Absolutely. You'll never hear me say that somebody does not get natural immunity. There is natural immunity, but people bandy around these words as if it's all or nothing. Natural immunity is not all or nothing. It's helpful, just like vaccine immunity is helpful. But what works even better is when you have covered your bases, and if you have if you get the vaccine as well, and then you get hybrid immunity. So we know how safe the vaccine is. We know there's not really a statistical downside in terms of the safety profile. Sure, nothing is zero in life in terms of safety, but as Shirleen said, always rather take the chances with the vaccine than with COVID. So in your case, I know you're not concerned of the vaccine side effects, but like I would just say, give that hybrid immunity, get it over and done with, and at some point there's going to be a booster available. She'll be 5 and she'll get the booster for the higher age, that age. Now I want to actually mention something.
Boaz?
Yeah, go ahead.
I read his question as what dose should he get his daughter? I may have read it incorrectly.
No, he's asking whether or not he should wait till she's 5 and the dosage would be a bigger dose.
So actually, I attended a talk given by an pediatric infectious disease attending over at Stanford. And she said some pediatricians are actually giving the higher dose to 5 to 4.5-year-olds if they're close enough to 5, because it's based on the maturity of the immune system, as you know, not weight-based. And how different is the immune system of a 4.5-year-old who will be 5, 2 months from now is, like that's probably no difference, but still we have to break up kids into some sort of age group. And so I think, he should talk to his pediatrician about whether he should just give her the 5-year-old dose now so that she can get, the 5-year-old dose when she turns, the second 5-year-old dose when she turns 5, or 2 5-year-old doses 3-4 weeks apart, and then 6 months later get the booster.
See, I didn't know there were any pediatricians willing to do that, but if they are, I wholeheartedly agree with her suggestion. So ask and find out if they're willing to do that. They might just look at the rule book and say no, or it depends.
Which is fine as well. Then, essentially she would be getting, let's say she got Pfizer, she would get 2 doses of the 6-month to 5-year-old dose, and then she would get the 3rd dose at the full dose.
Yeah, I would actually suggest in your case to go for Moderna, because then you're going to start hybrid immunity, but you'll start with a higher dose, right? So if you waited with the Pfizer, you'd go from 3 micrograms to 10 micrograms when she turns 5. But if you start with Moderna, you're going to start right away with 25 micrograms of basically the same thing. So it kind of works as a backdoor to it. So I would actually say in your case, go ahead and just get her a Moderna dose, which is available, 25 micrograms. Dose number 2 will be 25 micrograms. I will still say, make sure you get the 3rd dose when it comes out and is available, but you'll already have a heck of a lot of good hybrid immunity from her natural immunity plus 50 micrograms total of Moderna. Unless your pediatrician's willing to bend and do what Shirleen said, which is very cool and interesting. But yeah, the general idea is don't wait. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. You don't wait, because you still don't want to think of her as just, you think of her as she has immunity, but you know, the immunity is a vague word, right? She has some immunity. She has whatever immunity you have. And the thing that I didn't talk about yet is that when you have natural immunity, which is a real thing,
Wait,
you have
stop. Can you stop and clarify, because Karen is asking a question based on this conversation.
Yeah.
Are the doses based on age or weight? So
no, Shirleen said that briefly, but I'll rehash that. It's a great question that I didn't even know till 6 months ago, that unlike a lot of medications for kids, which are of course based on kilograms, right? We look at their weight size, that this is actually based on their immune system. So it's based on age. Doesn't matter if the kid is morbidly obese or underweight, it's based on age. So it's based on the immune system, so that's an important factor to understand. So it's good to reiterate that. So, but what was I just trying to say? We're talking about the Moderna. Oh, I was just going to clarify one point about natural immunity. Natural immunity is wonderful and absolutely protective to some degree, just like vaccines are wonderful and protective to some degree. Neither one is perfect, both of them are helpful. The important thing to just point out is that vaccines are predictively helpful. They're literally mathematical equations, and we will see how much, so you'll be able to follow, which is why we know when you need boosters and when waning happens. The issue with natural immunity is we don't know. Sure, we can look at overall big pictures of what's happening to people who have gotten COVID versus not, but we see that people who catch COVID with symptoms versus without symptoms or with harsh symptoms have different varying levels of protection and immunity afterwards. It's not the same mathematical thing afterwards. So your kid having COVID and another kid having COVID literally could have completely different levels of protection when they're done. Whereas after the vaccine, that's not the case, assuming your kids are both like, you know, same level of immuno health. Okay. Okay, moving down, Jade, very sweet. Thank you over. Oh no, Rachel's saying she had a friend that had it in April and again last week. Well, that's not fun to find out. So that was 2 months later. That's no fun. Let's see. Are there any other questions? I'm looking down. Are the dose-based weight? No, immune maturity. Okay, I hit all the questions that are in there. So everybody, you can wave goodbye or ask me questions now verbally because there's no other questions written over there. So everyone who's left, if you're still awake, you're well. I'm going to stay on to